Okay, so today I'm just going to be speaking about what dementia is. In our community, there's not a lot of understanding of what dementia is. Even something as simple as what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. A lot of people couldn't answer that. So it's very important in my organisation to reach out to the community and to spread the message about dementia. Also, I'm going to be speaking about some tips for caring for a person with dementia. And tonight I believe we have both family of people with dementia and also their staff carers. So I hope that we can cover both of that. Though I must say that my talk is mostly geared towards family carers. So please feel free to ask me any questions after the break, no matter which your role. I'd be very happy to answer them. And finally, I'm just going to talk about our services at Alzheimer's Australia, which you may be interested in accessing. We'd be very happy to receive a call from you all. Okay, so first I'm just going to talk about what is dementia. It's very important to have that understanding of what the disease is if you're going to care for somebody with dementia. So dementia is a medical condition that affects the brain. Dementia affects a whole range of a person's functioning. It affects them in many different ways. If we think about what is it about a person that happens in their brain, then we can understand how dementia, which is a condition that affects the brain, has such a huge impact on a person's functioning. There in the brain we hold all our memories, we hold our abilities to do everyday tasks, to think and reason, all of our emotional intelligence, all of that is contained in our brain, and dementia, unfortunately, can affect a whole range of a person's functioning. So dementia is a progressive disease. It does get worse over time, and unfortunately it is a terminal disease. We do not have a cure for dementia at this time, though of course all of our research efforts are very much focusing on that. Dementia has a huge impact on not only the person who has the dementia, you can imagine the ways that it affects them in their career, in their social life, in their personal life with their family. There's huge changes, but also in the people who care for someone with dementia. There's a huge impact on them as their roles might change in the family, as they deal with the stress of being a carer. So I really do want to address some of those issues in my talk today. So firstly, who gets dementia? Now, as we get older, our risk of developing dementia does increase, but it's very important to note that it's not a normal or natural part of getting older. It is a medical condition. And a lot of us, as we get older, I've heard people say that they become concerned if they find that they forget something, they can't remember where they put their car keys, can't remember why did I walk in this room for, what was I doing. And those concerns I really do want to highlight are very, very normal. Even me at 26 years old, I walk into a room and forget what I've done. That's very, very normal, and it's a lot different from the medical condition of dementia. I heard a good analogy once that if you don't know where you put your car keys, that's nothing to worry about. But if you look at your car keys and say, what are these? That's probably going to be a concern. So that's a good thing to remember. Also important to remember that dementia does not only affect older people. Your risk increases over the age of 65, but you can also get it in your 50s and your 40s as well. So there are many different types of dementia, and here we come into what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia. There are many different types. Apart from Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common type, there's also vascular dementia, which can occur after a person has a stroke. Many other types of dementia are a type that can develop in the later stages of Parkinson's disease. There's a dementia related to excessive alcohol use. So there's many different types, and the hallmarks of those different types of dementia I'll talk about in a little bit later. So as I mentioned earlier, dementia is a disease that progresses in severity over time, and a lot of carers do have questions about how fast that process is going to go. What's the progression going to be like? And again, that depends very much on the type of dementia that we're talking about here. In Alzheimer's disease, that tends to be a very gradual progression over a number of years. So 5, even up to 10 years across the progression of the disease. Other types of dementia, such as the one following a stroke, we can see a very sudden decline in a person's functioning, and it can be a huge period of adjustment after that very sudden deterioration. Another common question is what causes dementia, and often people have concerns if they've had a family member who has or had dementia. There's often a lot of fears that, oh, my grandfather had it, I think I might be getting it. That's a very common fear. And I will just say about that the genetic or inherited element of dementia is actually only very small. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to have dementia. And there are a lot of things that you can do at any stage of your life to reduce your risk of dementia. And this is a very important message that we do want our community to hear. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the ways you can reduce your risk of dementia very quickly. So a lot of these things you've probably heard in relation to a lot of other health problems. But it's important to know that what's good for our bodies, what's good for our physical health in that way, is also very good for our brains. So these are the ones you've all heard about before. Exercise is very important. This doesn't have to be going to the gym for an hour every day. A moderate exercise, going for a walk every second day for half an hour, all that you need to do to help significantly reduce your risk. Also, looking at our diet, avoiding high fat and high sugar diets, very important. Moderating our alcohol use, very important. And now for some of you might not always think about with reducing your risk of dementia is, as we get older in particular, making sure that we keep our minds active. So making sure that we learn new skills as we get older. And this doesn't have to be a big formal education. This can be doing something as simple as learning a new card game with your friends, or practicing your second language to help keep that skill up. All of these things that help keep the brain active. And very important with that also is your social well-being, and making sure that you do go out and see your friends and family, and keeping your brain very active in that way. Ideally, you can put the two together and have a social recreational group, and that's so very important, particularly as we get older. Okay, and the last one I just wanted to mention is around the type of dementia that does occur after a stroke sometimes. And that's just about keeping our heart healthy. So keeping an eye on things like your blood pressure and your weight, talking to your doctor about any concerns that you have there. They're very important things. And I will just say that on the issue of concerns about your memory, this is if you have concerns for your own memory, or about perhaps a family member who you might have noticed some changes in, anyone that you're concerned about. It's very important to seek a diagnosis or to at least figure out and investigate what's going on for that person. And there's a number of reasons why that is so important. If we can look to have an early diagnosis for a person who has dementia, that allows them to do a number of things. While they're still able to, they can make their wishes known, they can put their affairs in order, they can speak to family, very importantly, about what it is that they want in the later stages of the disease and what their needs are going to be. Also, there are medications that can slow down the progression of the disease. It doesn't cure or prevent it, but it does slow down the progression and helps that person maintain their functioning for as long as possible. And the earlier you can start those medications, the better. So there's a lot of different reasons why that diagnosis is important to gain if there are concerns. Also, to rule out that it's not something else as well is very important. There's quite a few medical conditions that might resemble dementia. When we're talking about family carers, we see a lot of carer stress. I think it certainly can't be denied that it's a very difficult role. And one of the biggest issues around that carer stress is adjustment to new roles. When we have a husband and wife couple, for example, where the husband has developed dementia, being given a diagnosis of dementia, there's a huge change in roles there. The wife takes on the carer role. She might find herself doing a lot of those just very practical things on a daily basis, feeding her husband, caring for her husband, all of those tasks. And it can sadly become less of a husband-wife dynamic and more of a carer person with dementia dynamic. So that's certainly a very difficult change in roles to adjust to, and it's very important to maintain those relationships with our family members despite the fact that they do have dementia, and to keep them special and loving. So I will say about those changing roles, it's very important to remember on that note that even though a person does have dementia, they're still a person. You wouldn't believe how often that is not recognised, unfortunately, in our community. They have a history, they have a unique personality, they've got needs, they've got wants, and when we're working with a person with dementia, it's very important to recognise them as an individual and to really try to understand what they're saying to us and perhaps what their behaviour is communicating to us. Very important to remember. Also on that note, it's very important to help the person with dementia to maintain their independence as long as you can at a realistic level. So speaking about people with dementia, you can imagine the huge impact that a diagnosis would have. You could imagine the independence that they might lose as their disease progresses. They might have to quit their job, particularly if they're a younger person. They might lose their licence. They might find that they can no longer do those things like cooking, cleaning, doing their laundry that they used to be able to do and just took that for granted. So they become more and more dependent on other people. And that has a huge impact on their on who they see themselves as a person and their well-being. So as much as we can, it's important to help a person with dementia to maintain their independence, to keep doing things that they enjoy and that brings joy to their lives. So that's a very important point. Of course, the thing with that is that a lot of carers will say, but I'm concerned about safety, I'm concerned about going out with that person, perhaps they won't behave appropriately for being in the community. But it's really important that we are looking towards developing a community that is open and friendly towards people with dementia and who really understand what that disease is about. And that can start with everybody here. So I will say that there is help out there. Our organisation, as I'll talk about a little bit later, there are so many ways that we aim to support carers to work through their very difficult role. So I'll talk about that at the end. So my first tip for working with someone with dementia is firstly to understand the disease, to really know what it is. I've done a really broad brush little summary of what dementia is, but to really understand it, we do need to really educate ourselves and do some more reading, particularly if we have a family member or person that we're caring for that we really want to understand and put ourselves in their shoes. So possibly an example of that comes to mind is that part of dementia is that a person does lose their abilities to understand what's going on in their own body. They might lose their ability to feel pain, for example. They'll feel irritated and know that something's wrong, but they might not be able to communicate to you, oh, that back pain's really playing up, I think I need some painkillers. They really do lose that ability. They might also lose their ability to tell you when they're hungry, when they're thirsty, or when they've had enough to eat. So an example might be at a family gathering, if you're all around a table eating, and you see that your family member with dementia keeps getting offered food. Have some more baklava. And it's important, if you really understand dementia, to think to yourself, well, I see that he's already eaten 3 of those, so although he can't tell me himself, he's probably had enough. So those are the ways that you can put yourself in the person with dementia's shoes and really understand them and be a very effective carer if you can do that. The second thing I want to mention is this hugely important point that as carers, it's extremely important for us to practice self-care and to look after ourselves and to make sure that we take a break. Being a carer of someone with dementia is a hugely stressful and demanding role, particularly for family who might be doing it quite literally 24/7. And it can have a huge impact on that person's social life. They might find that they are becoming increasingly socially isolated if they feel, well, I can't go out to church this weekend because, I don't want to take my husband with me. He might yell out in the middle of the ceremony, and that would be hugely embarrassing. I simply can't do that. And that's a very realistic thing to be concerned about. But what I will say there is that it's very important to take a break and to look at getting some respite for yourself so that you can go out with that person with dementia and just have a little bit of time out for yourself. It's still caring for the person with dementia because when we look after ourselves, when we're in a good headspace, we can be a better carer. That's a simple fact. If we're stressed, we're not going to be as good of carers as we can be. So looking at respite, and when I say respite, that purely means taking a bit of time out, whether that's asking a family member or a friend to step in and look after the person with dementia while you take some time out, or looking at formal respite options. So looking at an organisation that might be able to look after your family member while you take some time out. So the next thing I want to mention is the issue of residential care, nursing homes. And this is, again, a huge issue for family carers because it's a very emotionally loaded decision. It's very difficult. And usually in a family, there's a whole lot of people who have ideas and opinions and wishes about what they would like to see happen. So it is a huge issue. And I will say about that we can't deny how big that impact is to put someone that we know or someone that we love into care. It's important to see each family as an individual family and to see the ways that we might be able to support that family to keep the person with dementia living at home for as long as possible. Though on that note, there are some situations where a person does need to be put into residential care to ensure that they are being looked after. It's a sad truth, unfortunately, that some family carers simply cannot cope with all of that stress by themselves, and that is a very, very reasonable situation to find yourself in. So I will just say about that, this brings us pretty smoothly into the issue of families and how important it is for families to work together when they have a person with dementia amongst their family. Your families are your biggest source of support. When you're looking after someone, they're the most important people to consult when you're making decisions about the person that you care for. Unfortunately, we all have a family, so we all know the conflict that can come up when we're working with our families. But I've got a few tips that I really have seen work very well. Firstly, make sure that you do set aside time to talk to your family about your wishes and what you would like to, future plans for the person with dementia. For example, if you've had a family member recently diagnosed, call a family meeting. We don't have to call it a family meeting, but you can invite everyone around for dinner just to talk about how that diagnosis has impacted on them. What are their thoughts about it? What would they like to see happen with your mum or dad or whoever it might be? And of course, also speaking to the person who has the diagnosis. How are they feeling about this? How would they like their family to help them as they go through this process? So it is worthwhile to really make that time to talk and iron out some issues. Very, very important. So I'd say on that it's very important for families to help each other out. One of the best ways that a person can be supported to stay in their home for as long as they possibly can is to have that cohesion within the family for everyone to help each other out and to have that clear communication of being able to ask for help. It's actually a very difficult thing to do, even through our families, is to let them know that we're not coping and that we do need some help. That's the most important thing that you could do as a family carer. And when I say family, that doesn't just have to be your sons and daughters. As the group community, I know how tight-knit you are, and you are the family as well. So it's asking your friends and everybody in the community as well. Okay. So I also will say there about some the formal care services that are available to a person who's caring for someone with dementia. And that's things like home care, having someone come into your home to help you out with domestic chores, for example, to help you out with other care tasks like showering or giving medication, all of those things. They can really be things that we can benefit from having some formal help from trained staff. However, that whole system can be quite hard to navigate. How do we get those services? What kind of money can we get back from the government? What do I need? What are my particular individual needs there? So I will say that there are a lot of organisations out there that can help you navigate those services and to help decide what you really need. And GovCare is one of them, just to talk about your individual needs and to help understand how the system works. And once we've figured out how it all works, and we have somebody coming into our home to help us out, there can also be some issues there as well. And we can find that we're not particularly, we might have some issues with the person who's helping us out. They're doing a fantastic job, but there's just some issues that we need resolved. And I see that a lot, and I would say that the worst thing that you could do in that situation is to just cut it off and say, well, that's it, I'm done with that. The best thing you can do again is communication. Talk to your home care provider about what your concerns are, to try and reach a resolution so that you can continue to receive those services, but in a way that's helpful for you. Very important to speak up if you're having some issues. And my last tip here for carers is about communication with your person with dementia. There's a lot of ways that communication is affected when a person has dementia. Of course, one part of our brains is the part that looks after our language and speaking and understanding what's being said to us. And in a lot of different types of dementia, that language area is affected. So we find that we might have some real difficulties communicating and being understood by the person with dementia. It's a big issue. Another one that we might see is that as the dementia progresses, that person might start to revert back to the first language that they learned. We do see that. So if they firstly learned Greek, for example, and later on learned English, they're going to revert back to speaking Greek a whole lot more as it progresses. And this can cause issues. You know, if you have grandchildren, for example, who only speak English, we might find that they can no longer communicate with that person, for example, and they can become quite isolated in that way. So with communication, and also with that switching back to our first language, one of the best things you can do is remind them very, very calmly that you're speaking, asking them to speak in English, and just saying, I'm really sorry, I don't speak Greek, could we speak in English? And often that's all that's required to switch back to that first language. And these are tips that you can share with people in your family as well to help facilitate them communicating. So that's a really important one. There are a whole lot of other tips for communication. Very important is to go with the flow when you're communicating with a person with dementia. You might find that if you ask them a lot of questions, for example, or don't you remember that? We were doing this last Tuesday, that they can become quite agitated and distressed. And that's purely because it's becoming very apparent to them that they can't remember things. Those questions really highlight to them, oh, I can't remember that. And that's very distressing for the person with dementia. So when you're speaking with someone with dementia, it's important to go along with what they're telling you. And if they're starting to look distressed, talk about something else. It's really that simple. The last thing we want to do is to upset and escalate someone further. And really, again, that's just seeing someone as a person, isn't it? If we were talking to someone in everyday conversation and they were looking like they weren't comfortable, we'd change the topic. So it's really just those very simple things. And I will say, you know, all of these tips, again, very important to share with everybody that we know so that the person with dementia doesn't become isolated, so that they can still maintain their relationships with everyone that's important to them in their lives. So last of all, won't be too much longer if we have a little break. I'd just like to speak about our services that we do have at Alzheimer's Australia. Now we're a free government-funded service, which is fantastic. So any time that you call or access our services, they are free of charge to you. In your little packs there, I've included a few flyers with a few numbers on there. But I will firstly speak about our office in Canberra. We call it the Dementia and Memory Community Centre. And here we run a whole lot of different community activities. We have carer support groups. We have leisure groups for people with dementia that's specifically tailored to where they are in their disease and to help maintain that quality of life. We do a whole lot of fundraising activities through the DMCC. We have a whole lot of information available there, so we would love to see you at any time if you'd like to drop in or find out more about the services that we offer. The next service I will mention is the National Dementia Helpline that you've all got a little flyer on. Now this is a telephone service, again free service, that you can call and ask absolutely anything about dementia. Whether you are a carer who are having particular problems that you want to talk through for some support or counselling, we can help that. Or even if you're just a person from the community who has questions about dementia that you're interested in, we'd love to hear from you. We also have our Dementia Behaviour Management Advisory Service, which is a total mouthful, but we call ourselves DBMAS. And we work with carers when they're experiencing difficulties caring for a person with dementia, if they're showing some difficult behaviours that they're finding difficult to cope with. So if they find that perhaps the person's up all night and they want to know how to cope with that, if they're finding it difficult to communicate with the person with dementia, we can offer some advice. And again, that can be done over the phone, or we can come out and visit you in your home and really have a thorough talk about your situation and how we might be able to help you. We've got our website, flightdementia.org.au, where you'll find, again, a whole lot of information about dementia and information about the services and programs that we're offering in the upcoming month. And I will say there that it's we're very proud of the fact that we are a culturally inclusive service. All of our staff are educated on how to provide that culturally appropriate service. We certainly do offer interpreting services, and if you ever give us a call and you would prefer to have that option, to have it interpreted over the phone or in person, just let us know, and we're very, very happy to organise that. And also, on that last note, fundraising is very important to us, and so is research. We're always working towards ways that we can better understand dementia and the caring experience so that we can deliver a good service to carers and people with dementia. So I'll just really quickly mention a research project that we're conducting at the moment, and there's just a little flyer in each of your goodie bags about this. This is a research project that we're doing with carers from culturally diverse backgrounds. And we offer this as an online survey if you'd like to participate that way. We can send you out a pen and paper survey if you'd be interested. And also we can do it in person if you're not feeling comfortable doing it pen and paper or on the internet and you prefer to do it verbally. I'm very, very happy to sit down with you and talk through some important issues. It's very important to us that we do hear from the Greek community about your needs and how we can best meet them. So we'd love to hear from you about that. There's an email address and a phone number on the flyer. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia. Out of everyone who has dementia in our community, about 75% of them have Alzheimer's disease. And in Alzheimer's disease, that's when we see a gradual shrinking of the brain and the cells in the brain dying and the brain shrinking. And this is something that happens over a extended period of time, and over that time, as we see our brain shrink, we lose more and more of our abilities. So in terms of Alzheimer's disease, about the progression of that, we often talk about early Alzheimer's disease, middle stage, and later stage Alzheimer's disease. And this can occur over a period of 5 to 10 years. In the first thing that people often notice is memory loss. So waking up in the morning, it's that short-term memory loss. So not remembering what appointments you had on that day, finding yourself going for a walk and getting lost, even though you're in your very familiar neighbourhood. Those things are the things that we often start to see first. In early stage dementia, the person does often have a lot of insight into what's happening to them. They really do understand that they are losing their memory. And often when people gain that diagnosis in that early stage, it's a huge emotional impact on them because they do still have so much insight and so much of their abilities. So it's a very difficult thing to deal with. And again, as the family and friends of someone with dementia, it's so important that we allow them to talk about how they feel. Even though it can be very uncomfortable for us to talk about it, they need us to be able to talk about how they're feeling and what their fears are for the future and what they want for the future. In middle stage dementia, we start to see things like a person loses their ability to do a lot of everyday tasks, like driving, just cooking their meals. They might leave the stove on. So it's in that middle stage of dementia that a person really starts to need that very constant care, somebody checking in on them very regularly to make sure that they're safe, they're locking their doors at night, that they're taking their medication. Very, very important at that stage. And then in the end stage of dementia, we unfortunately see even more of a person's abilities decline. We see more memory loss. The way the memory loss works in Alzheimer's disease is that it's a gradual process, kind of backwards, if that makes sense. So you lose your most recent memories first, but you very often maintain those memories of your teenage years or your early 20s, for example. And a lot of people with dementia in the end stages do actually identify that they feel like they are in their 20s. They feel that that's who they are. And if they look at themselves in the mirror, they might not even recognise who they are. So you can understand thinking like that, why they start to not recognise family members. So you're not quite looking how you did 30, 40 years ago. So yeah, we can imagine that. So I just wanted to address that just about the progression of Alzheimer's disease. As I mentioned, there's quite a few different types of dementia. We mentioned the one that sometimes occurs after a stroke, and that's when we see a very sudden decline in a person's abilities, and it can be in quite specific areas. So for example, a person's language abilities can be very significantly affected, and they might not be able to communicate or even just articulate those words the way that they used to do. Other types of dementia is a dementia that can occur at the later stages of Parkinson's disease, also Huntington's disease is another one. And the exact picture of what that looks like for a person varies by the disease that they have and also who they are as an individual. Everybody is different. And that is why no matter how much you read about these diseases, you might think, well, the person that I know isn't like that and they do this thing. And so it's important to remember that everyone's an individual. And if you have specific questions about what you can expect it's important to talk to a health professional about that so that you can better understand it and what to expect. So I hope that was helpful for a few people. Now I'd just like to open up the floor to see if anyone has any more questions. Now, Alzheimer's disease is just one type of dementia. There's a number of different types of dementia. So we've got our Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common, and that causes those dementia-like symptoms. A stroke can cause a dementia, those symptoms of memory loss. And as I just mentioned, all those different types of disease. Now, if you're thinking which is the worst amongst all of them, then again, that really just depends on where you're at in your disease. Again, everyone's an individual. You might be at a very early stage and have a lot of functioning still, a lot of ability to be an independent person, but later on, unfortunately, you're going to become more and more dependent on others. And that's a very complex issue because it's very likely that they will have insight and understanding that they are losing memory or losing abilities. Whether they're able to fully accept that within themselves or to even be able to accept that diagnosis, we might see a lot of denial, we might see a lot of people saying, no, that's not me, there's nothing wrong with me, I don't have that disease. We certainly do see that, and that's certainly very understandable for a person to have a lot of difficulties processing and understanding that is the disease and that's the path that they're on. So it could be hard sometimes then to say, does that person really have insight into the changes, or do they not realise it all? So it can be very hard, and again, case by case basis, I'm sure that varies. But I will say that although it is rare, it's certainly very prevalent. We have a specific program here at Alzheimer's Australia for younger onset dementia, and that's just new. It's just started in the past year, and we've already got over 100 people with younger onset dementia from around southeast Queensland. So it's certainly a very real issue, and it comes with its own very real complications. If you think about an aged care home, which is where people with younger onset dementia very often find themselves, it's really not suited to that person's needs. They're physically active, they have those needs. They might have family who are still quite young. A lot of people with younger onset dementia have teenage children, it's very, very sad. And this is why it's so important that we work towards helping these people in any way we can. But certainly there's some very unique issues there. And I will say that if you know anyone with younger onset dementia, we do have this fantastic case management program to individualise that person's care and to help them link in with appropriate services. So our physical address for our office is 825 Stanley Street, Wollongabba. So write that down if you're interested, or just give us a call and we will tell you where we are.
But this phone number.
Which phone number? Okay. So either one of these phone numbers, you'll get that answer. I'd probably go for the National Dementia Helpline first. But if you ring it and it's engaged, then give the next one up, or either or. We're all in the same office, and we very often run to each other's desks and say, oh, I've got this person, you know, they're more appropriate for your service. So. Now, there are some issues for us in recommending places or giving specific lists. That's a bit of a legal thing, but there are services that can help you to look through what's available. I'd recommend a website, which is the Aged Care Guide. If you can Google that, even if you just Google finding nursing homes in Queensland, you'll come onto that website. And what you can do on that website is put in your geographical area. You can put in what you're particularly looking for in a nursing home, whether it has a dementia-specific area, a particular ward, whether you need you want to see particular leisure activities or particular dietary requirements, all that kind of stuff you can look at there. So that's a really good site to have a look at if you are considering looking at your options in aged care. You can access a paper copy of it. There's big, thick paper copies that do come out. If you give us a call, we can help direct you to where you can get that. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but there's a number that we could give you that you could call up the Aged Care Guide and say, can I have one posted out, or where can I get my closest one? Now, I believe it was Mr. Alzheimer back in the 1800s who first described a dementia. But it's really true that this is something that's really coming into the focus of our community now. I think for a very long time it's been quite a silent disease that families have coped with and dealt with without a whole lot of understanding or support, very sadly. But the research focus is really, really turning around. It's been identified as a priority area. I think that our politicians and policymakers are really seeing those stats about the prevalence in the upcoming years, and it is becoming a big priority. And now the more that you look, you can find a lot of information about
it. Okay, the current thinking about Alzheimer's is that it's actually related to a protein called amyloid, which is deposited in the brain and causes what we see in Alzheimer's. Now, that was released recently in Melbourne at the World Diabetes Congress, where they basically said that diabetes is basically Alzheimer's in development. And the only commonality between the two is this amyloid protein. Now, the question was, is it what we're eating? Is it what we're breathing? And given that we're seeing so much of it in Western society, yes, it is linked to our obesity. Because when they looked at what was common amongst the diabetes and the Alzheimer's, it had to do with high insulin levels in the brain causing the amyloid deposits. And I was saying, we as practitioners find it difficult to distinguish between Alzheimer's type dementia, vascular dementia, mixed dementia, lean body dementia, because you can only make those diagnoses when the person dies. You do an autopsy and you get a firm diagnosis. But we have an idea that based on, is it sudden, as you pointed out, then that's most likely a vascular dementia. Is it slow, stepwise? That's most likely an Alzheimer's dementia, but it could also be small blood vessel disease happening in diabetes slowly. So it's very difficult, but at the end of the day, it really makes no difference whether it's Alzheimer's type or vascular, except that the medications will work in Alzheimer's, but they won't work in the vascular dementia. So we need, as clinicians, to be able to distinguish so we can offer patients at least a therapeutic trial of those medications. And the only other thing I want to add is that the Greek culture is very unique, all right? And it's unique because this generation that we're seeing, and I'm seeing a lot of it, is people are living to 88 to 92. And so I get an 88 to 92-year-old man who comes in with a 78-year-old wife. So there's this big age gap that we're seeing. So these wives are living with husbands that they've actually seen become physically frailer, and then on top of the frailty, they're seeing them become cognitively frailer. So there's this long carer role that the wife has. So I found it interesting that you were using the husband as the carer for the wife, which is usually the opposite in our culture. Right? Yeah. Right. It does happen, but it usually happens when it's a true Alzheimer's case. Whereas in our culture, it's more the wife taking care of the husband.
So what short-term memory loss means is that day-to-day forgetfulness of those things that have, in the short term come into our mind. So that often comes out, as the second part of your question alludes, in conversation. So a person with short-term memory loss might forget about what they were just saying. They might have gotten that 5 minutes ago. They were telling that story, and that's exactly what is meant by short-term memory loss. And we see that in all different types of dementia. And certainly if that is something that's happening a lot, if you're really noticing that in your conversation with somebody, that is a reason certainly to talk to your doctor about those concerns and to talk about why that might be happening. Very important. So with that, repeating the sentence, that can be very, very difficult as someone who's trying to have a conversation with somebody. That can be very frustrating, and you think, oh, I've heard this before, particularly if it's happening a lot. And the truth of the matter is that when talking to someone with short-term memory loss, it can be difficult, and this is why it's important to take some time out and take a break, and also to be aware in yourself when you're becoming a bit frustrated. If you're feeling really frustrated, that's a good time to say, okay, this is happening. I might need to just say, I'm going to go and make a cup of tea and go into the kitchen and just take some time out just to be aware of that's what's going on for you, and that you do need to calm down a little bit before you go back in there. It's important that you do have pleasant, calm interactions with the person with dementia, because they're going to pick up when you're agitated and when you're upset, and they'll reflect that right back at you. So it's certainly worth taking some time out to get your head together as well, so that you can communicate calmly. But it's certainly not easy. That's what I'll say about that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, can you just comment so that everyone leaves here understanding, right, that not all dementia is memory impairment.
Yes.
Okay, it's dysfunction. Memory is just part of the total dementia profile. It's about being disorganised, not being able to organise yourself. So, because we've got patients whose memory, their short-term memory is 75% there, but they fail on other parts of organising activity. So I think...
Great point. It's really those thinking, reasoning skills, that planning, all of those thinking abilities. If you think about everything that's done in your brain and think that dementia can affect any part of that, it can have such a different picture. So you're very right.
And our Greek parents, right, the wives particularly who are younger than their partners, our Greek parents, wives younger than their partners, they go, he remembers everything, but he's playing games with me because he just can't do this or he can't do that. Because they're focusing on the fact that memory is the issue, not the disorganisation of the day.
Very good.
forgetfulness,
Yeah.
and a progression is all forgetfulness, and the end stage is just extreme forgetfulness. So there's nothing in this, that whole stigma around dementia and what it means and the facets of it are just not there. And you know, it's taken, for example, we're at this stage now in our Greek community that the word dementia is such a stigma and such a taboo that we need to do a lot of education and a lot of information to get to a certain level of understanding. You know, I could say 16 years ago, we had the same issue with mental health. Oh, what's depression? What's schizophrenia? Oh, we keep these people away. Keep members of our community in locked away because it's too embarrassing. But it took 16 years of constant discussions and education and you know, lots of talks like this and talking with families and having it open and declaring it open before we got to the stage where everyone knows what, you know, most people feel comfortable about mental health.
Yeah, now we're all
But-
depressed.
So, you know, we're hoping that dementia is going to be one of those banners that we take on board and really do something about it in a greater way in this community.
And I think it's very important to speak to the leaders in your community about the specific issues in your culture, to really voice them and to talk about you know, the feelings and the cultural messages that go along with dementia and to really look at them and challenge them. It's very, very important. So I think we do have to wrap it up there, but if you have any more questions, please just call us. We'd be so very happy to answer your questions and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Tonight was all about bringing together the family carers or friends and volunteers who are living with or close with people who are living with dementia, to support you with information. You know, hopefully today you know a little bit more about where to go, how to go about it, a little bit more information, because the lack of information, fear can come from a lack of information. So knowledge is power, and hopefully you're a little bit more informed now, and that it will make the challenge of the road that you have to travel that little bit straighter, that little bit more easier. And know that there's always someone there to help you along, and you're not alone. So we thank you so very much for coming this evening.